So picture this. A country is being bombed. It does what you're supposed to do. It goes to the world's highest court to try and make it stop. But the court never actually rules on the war. How is that even possible? Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating case where the biggest battle wasn't about the war itself, but just about getting through the courthouse doors. And that's the central question right there. It's the spring of 1999, during the Kosovo conflict, and Yugoslavia is being hit by aerial bombardments. So it goes to the International Court of Justice, the World Court, and asks for an emergency order to stop everything. But flash forward 5 years, the case is over, and the court never decided if the bombing was legal or not. Let's find out why. All right, so the story kicks off on April 29, 1999. The Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, as it was called back then, files a case at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. And get this, they didn't just sue one country. Nope. They filed applications against 10 different NATO member states. We're going to focus on the case against Belgium. And the accusation was huge. Yugoslavia was basically saying these nations were violating some of the most fundamental rules in the world. You can't just use force, you have to protect civilians, and you can't commit genocide. But here's the crucial part. They weren't asking for a ruling that would take years. They wanted the court to step in and order the bombing to stop immediately. Now, this kind of immediate request has a special name. It's a request for provisional measures. The easiest way to think about it is like an international law version of a temporary restraining order. Yugoslavia was basically yelling, "Hey, court, freeze everything. Stop the military action while you figure out the whole case." So did it work? Well, just over a month later, on June 2nd, 1999, the court gave its answer, and in a whole series of orders, it flat out rejected Yugoslavia's request for those emergency measures. The bombs would continue to fall. This was, the first major legal blow to Yugoslavia's case. And the reasons why are really important. The court's rejection really boiled down to two key things. First, a big timing problem. See, the bombing started on March 24th, but Yugoslavia didn't accept the court's jurisdiction until April 25th. So the court was basically saying, look, the fight had already started before you even gave us permission to be the referee. And second, on that really serious genocide claim, the court said, whoa, hold on. For something to be genocide, there has to be a specific intent to destroy a group. And at that early stage, they just didn't see any evidence of that intent. So, okay, the emergency plea failed. But the case itself wasn't dead yet. It just moved on to the next phase. And when the court came back with its final judgment 5 years later in 2004, it didn't even really talk about those 1999 arguments. Instead, it zeroed in on something much more fundamental and, well, something that would decide the whole thing. Here's the best way to think about it. The 1999 decision was all about whether Yugoslavia had the right key for the right door to the courthouse. But the 2004 decision was about something more basic. Was Yugoslavia even allowed on the courthouse property to begin with? It's this crucial difference between the court's power over a specific case versus a country's basic right of access to the court. The court's logic here was actually pretty simple. It followed a critical chain. Step 1, to sue at the ICJ, a state has to be a party to the court statute. Step 2, to be a party to that statute, you pretty much have to be a member of the United Nations, which led to the one giant question that the entire case would come to depend on. Was Yugoslavia actually a member of the UN back in April 1999? Now, you might think that's a simple yes or no question, but oh no, it was not. After the old Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia broke up in the early 90s, the new Federal Republic of Yugoslavia's status at the UN was, and I'm quoting the court here, ambiguous. It was in this totally unique, legally bizarre position that the court called sui generis, which basically means it was in a class all its own. Right, so this whole mess started in 1992. The UN told Yugoslavia, hey, you can't just keep the old country's seat, you have to apply as a new member. But for the next 8 years, there was this strange limbo. Yugoslavia insisted it was a member, but the UN kept it from participating in things. Then finally, on November 1st, 2000, Yugoslavia was formally admitted as a brand new member. And for the court looking back at all this, that was the smoking gun. Their logic was, well, if you had to be admitted in 2000, you couldn't have been a member back in 1999. And that brings us to the final verdict. Now, the court reached a unanimous decision. Everyone agreed. But hidden just beneath that surface of unanimity was this profound intellectual fight among the judges. And it tells you a lot about how international law actually works. The court's final judgment came down on December 15th, 2004, and it was unanimous. The judges found that the court had no jurisdiction to even hear the case. And why? Because of that whole UN membership puzzle. They concluded that in 1999, Yugoslavia had no right of access to the court. It wasn't allowed on the courthouse grounds. Case closed. But here's the crazy twist. Even though all the judges agreed the case had to be dismissed, 7 of them, that's almost half the court, including the vice president, wrote this special declaration saying they profoundly disagree with the reasoning. Think about that. They agreed on the final destination, but they absolutely hated the road the court took to get there. So what was this big fight about? Well, the majority of the court took this really complicated and honestly controversial path. They based their whole decision on Yugoslavia's weird UN membership status to deny it access. But those 7 other judges, they argued for a much simpler way out. They basically said, hey, why are we doing all this? Let's just stick to our original reasons from 1999. They felt the court already had perfectly good grounds to dismiss the case based on that timing issue. It was just a cleaner, less controversial route that fit better with past decisions. So if you take away one thing, it's this. A case that started with these massive accusations of illegal war and genocide ended up being decided on a super technical, procedural question about UN membership. The court never, ever got to hear the arguments about whether the war itself was legal. It just goes to show you that in the world of international justice, sometimes the procedures are the entire battlefield. And this leaves us with a final thought. The court itself pointed out that even without a judgment, countries are still responsible for what they do under international law. But it raises a much bigger question, doesn't it? When the path to justice is this kind of legal labyrinth, what does that really mean for the whole promise of a world governed by the rule of law?